And just going on to the Savings Working Group report, there's been a few recommendations around the Kiwisaver side of things. Well, first of all, what's the Green Party's view on the overall report?
I think the diagnosis was pretty good, but the prescription for what we should do about it was pretty weak. I think probably the central element that's missing from it is a capital gains tax, excluding the family home. I think that when you look at their concerns around housing, so they say that the tax system is the cause of half of the increase in house prices in the last decade. Clearly the thing that's missing is the capital gains tax, excluding the family home. That's not there. When you look at their concerns around the government's fiscal position going forward, again, the capital gains tax, excluding the family home, would raise around $4.5 billion a year, and that's probably a conservative estimate. So I do think that that's one of the missing elements. Now, obviously, that was part of their terms of reference, but I just think that if you look at the changes you need to make, it's clearly one of the things you need to change.
And what about their idea for the soft compulsion for Kiwisaver? Like, would the Greens back the view to everyone gets enrolled in Kiwisaver automatically and then opt out? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're not opposed to it. It's still a voluntary scheme in the sense that everyone can opt out. So it just basically moves a few more people in that direction. So there is a certain logic to it. I mean, the real issue for us will be, for New Zealand rather, will be to what extent do these kind of schemes redirect savings from one area to another, and to what extent do they result in new savings? And there's some evidence that the Australian scheme compulsory over there, fully compulsory, has resulted in an increase in savings. But there's also a lot of evidence from elsewhere that some of these schemes don't have a huge impact. So I think that looking at moving what savings there are into the productive sector by changing the rules around investment properties would make a significant difference, would also make more productive capital available to New Zealand businesses. Some of the Kiwisaver rules I think will make a pretty marginal difference, but might make some difference.
Cool. And obviously the election date has now been announced, so effectively campaigns are starting.
Yeah.
The Greens would most likely go with Labour. Is that right? Would the capital gains tax issue, how high on the agenda would that be in any sort of election bargaining?
Well,
because Labour's still ruling it out.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite important for a couple of reasons. We're very concerned about going into further government debt, and so our approach has been that if you're going to talk about spending, then you also need to talk about revenue and where you intend to get it. Labor's identified some sources of revenue, tax avoidance, perhaps doing some ring fencing, and some cutting of spending, for example on this missile project that the Navy wants to do. But they haven't identified any significant areas of new revenue, and so I think that it is just inevitable in New Zealand that we will eventually do what just about every other country does, and that is have some form of a capital gains tax. So I think whether it's national or later, sooner or later we're going to go there because it's obviously missing and obviously needed.
Okay. Right. And also, just back to the Savings Working Group thing, have you had a chance to look at the inflation, indexing of inflation on the interest, savings component of interest, and what do you think about that? It's sort of disregard, you don't pay tax on the inflation component of interest. Would the Greens back something like that, do you think, as a way to get more people investing in term deposits?
Yeah. So obviously the issue there is there's a revenue cost, and there's a further layer of complication into the tax system. But on the other hand, it might result in an increased incentive. So we've had a bit of a look at it. We haven't reached an absolutely final conclusion about it, but it's clearly there are complications with it. It's like, how do you implement a capital gains tax? There's more or less complicated ways you could do it. So does the complication really justify the benefit? And I think that's a debate we need to have.